Hello, my name is Travis Boley with the Oregon-California Trails Association, and today we're here in my hometown of Lexington, Missouri. I moved here when I was 7 years old. Right across the street from where I'm standing now was my home. It's no longer there, but behind me, this street was the Santa Fe Trail. Growing up here, we would run around this neighborhood and act like we were pioneers in those days. Everything from the Santa Fe Trail to early Mormon history, freighting on the Oregon and California Trail, military forts, the Pony Express, Jesse James, the Civil War, and so much more happened right here in Lexington, Missouri. And today, we're going to show you all the things you can see here. So now I'm standing at the site where Lexington began, just around the corner from my house, which was right over there. This is Old Town. In 1824, the All Brothers established a trading post right here on this road, which was the Santa Fe Trail. Later that year, a log courthouse was built right here on the hill behind me, and about 9 years later, in 1833, that was replaced with a brick courthouse. All of that would move about a mile away, closer to the Missouri River, when steamboat traffic really picked up. So today we're going to explore the evolution of Lexington's history, and I brought a friend along with me, Antoinette Nebinger. Are you ready to explore my old town?
Absolutely, Travis, let's do it.
So when I was a kid growing up here in Lexington, I was acutely aware that two of the founders of the Pony Express were from right here in Lexington, William Waddell and William Russell, and today we're standing at the grave of William Waddell. William Waddell was actually born in Virginia, then moved to Kentucky when he was a kid, and then later as an adult set up shop here in Lexington. He got his start in shipping, and he had a partner by 1853 with William Russell, and they were actually shipping items to Fort Riley. They had a contract. In 1854, the government started offering larger contracts, and they realized at that time that they were really going to need a partner because it was too big for them to handle on their own. And that's where Alexander Majors comes in, and that's the firm of Russell, Majors, and Waddell. That all really began its genesis right here in Lexington. In 1854, they were awarded a contract that they would be the sole supplier of all the military forts in the West. These were the forts along the Santa Fe Trail, the Oregon and California Trail, and other forts throughout the West. And by 1857, they'd grown quite large. They'd made about $300,000 the year before. It was at that point that they were asked by the commandant at Fort Leavenworth to supply military wagons going to Utah for the Utah War in 1857. They had about 2.5 million pounds of freight, and unfortunately for them, their wagons were seized and burned, and they didn't have an official contract with the U.S. Army, so they pretty much lost their backsides on that deal. They did recover and were successful for a few more years, and by 1860 started the Pony Express. In 1858, they were awarded a new contract to freight in the American West, and they moved up to Nebraska City that year. And in 1859, again, they were shipping hundreds of thousands of dollars of goods west. Russell, Majors, and Waddell made an interesting set of characters to form a company. Russell was the very political one. Majors was a bit more stoic and reserved. But I've got a great quote here that describes William Waddell as a phlegmatic, stoical, inclined to sulk if displeased, a cautious penny pincher, and unable to reach a decision without ponderous deliberation. So I think it made a lot of sense that he ran the business side of this operation. Probably a lesser known fact about William Waddell is that he was a slave owner, and at least one of his slaves is buried right here in Lexington, a guy named Joseph Myers, and we'll visit his grave a little bit later. But also, his own granddaughter was born a slave. His son Milton was the master of his daughter's mother, and Harriet Ann Dawes lived into adulthood, and her grandfather and her father Milton are buried here side by side. Originally, this cemetery was started as a family plot by William B. Waddell's parents, Elizabeth Hudson and William W. Waddell. Elizabeth is buried right here. This was the family plot. A little bit later, William B. would buy more of the land, and this became the town cemetery, but only for white folks in the beginning.
The grandson of William B. Waddell, Walter Waddell, became the executor of the estate of Joseph Meyer. Joseph Meyer had been a slave of William B. Waddell, and he died in 1913 at the age of 71 from tuberculosis. Joe, as they called him, remained close to the Waddell family and was regarded as a dependable and trustworthy man. I'm standing here next to Joseph Meyer's grave here in Forest Grove Cemetery in Lexington, Missouri. He very clearly has the largest tombstone in the entire cemetery, a true testament to how much the Waddell family cared for him. The cemetery had fallen into much disrepair. A volunteer group came in and restored the entire cemetery. There was a book by Judy Lindquist that was recently published detailing the lives of the people that were buried here. We're here in front of the Missouri River, near where Lewis and Clark's expedition camped in 1804 and again in 1806. Accompanying them was Clark's slave, York. York was treated equally in all matters, including voting, which was not the case when he returned back home. One of the most interesting stories I encountered about York was his introduction to the Flathead tribe in Montana. The Flatheads had a tradition that the strongest man who proved himself during battle got to paint his body with the black soot from the war fire. They thought this was extremely incredible, considering that York's black skin was not painted on. They held him in extreme high regard for this and considered him to be ordained by God.
So here we are standing in downtown Lexington, Missouri, next to the 1960 Russell, Majors, and Waddell Pony Express Centennial Monument. It was 100 years after the fact that this monument was installed. Very fitting to have it here on the courthouse lawn. Catty corner across the street was their headquarters. 2 doors down from that was General Sterling Price's headquarters, the Confederate general who led Confederate forces here in 1861. And embedded up here in the courthouse in a column is a cannonball from that battle. I believe they were trying to hit his headquarters and instead hit the courthouse. Now we're standing at the corner of 13th and Franklin in downtown Lexington at the site of the Saluda Memorial. This is actually the last place I lived in Lexington about 30 years ago. It burned down and at a later date they created this heritage park for the victims of the Saluda, which is probably the worst disaster of steamboat history on the Missouri River. The morning of Good Friday, April 9th, 1852, the Saluda was docked here at Lexington with about 175 passengers on board. The captain, Captain Belt, said, "We're going to round this bend or blow this boat to hell." And that's exactly what he did. He really fired up the boilers, tried to fight the high current and the ice flows, and wound up blowing the boat up. About 125 of those people were killed. Of those, 75 were Mormons from Europe heading to Council Bluffs and then on to Salt Lake City. The rest were 49ers heading to California. Most of those deceased are buried here in town, and about 21 of the children were adopted by locals. So the bell here is actually not the original bell from the Saluda. This is an 1847 bell, a little bit older, that was donated for the purpose of this park. The 1849 bell that was on the Saluda actually stands in front of the First Christian Church in Savannah, Missouri, which is about 15 minutes north of St. Joe. Also honored here in Heritage Park is William Morrison. William Morrison was born in 1817 in Pittsburgh and later moved to Lexington, where he became a Santa Fe trail trader. He also started a foundry and created a lot of the stoves that went west on wagons. During the Civil War, he retrofitted his foundry to make munitions for the Union Army because he was a strong Union supporter, which was unusual in Lexington because it being a slaveholding town, it was a pretty strong Confederate town. He would later become mayor of Lexington and a bank president as well. So pretty important guy to depict here in the park. I'm here with Jim Kinney, who's the board president of the Lexington Hospital, and they're responsible for restoring this Russell, Majors, and Waddell monument. And I understand, Jim, that recently the hospital underwent an expansion. The monument got removed and lost for a little while. Tell us the story of what happened.
That's correct. Yeah, it's a very fascinating story. As things happened during construction, the monument was placed at the construction management area. The plaque that was embedded in the monument disappeared. We had a changeover in our city administration. A new mayor came in and had one of the folks with the street department pick this monument up and take it to the street department, unbeknownst to most of us on the board. Where that monument ended up kind of was lost. Eventually word of mouth got out in our small community, Travis, and found out that it was out at the street department. It was on a wooden pallet. By then, almost 2 years later, weeds were grown up around it. It was in pretty rough shape, and it was already some probably 80 plus years old. Our construction company that was currently in town doing the parking lot and this new gorgeous wall took it to a contractor in Kansas City known as Eagle Iron Refinishing and Restoration. A couple of weeks ago, we also discovered that the original plaque that had been missing for over 2 years was had been stolen originally when they first tore it down, and it was in an evidence room at our local police station. The history is so important. This plaque summarizes a little bit of what took place out here. We're standing at College Park, close to our battlefield. The community is known for the site of a Civil War battle We've kind of built a lot of our tourism and our history around this park and that battlefield, but truly if it wasn't for Russell, Majors and Waddell, their freighting and shipping company, and of course then the formation of the Pony Express after that, there's a good chance Lexington and a lot of the West would look different today. We're so glad that we've got this monument back up, and we just hope that people enjoy it for many, many years to come.
I'm standing here at the site of the Battle of Lexington here in 1861. 6 years earlier, the pro-slavery convention was held here, and this is what was said. Slavery is found in our midst. It was forced on the South by the combined efforts of Old England and New England, now also leagued together for selfish ends in an unholy alliance for its extermination. The present generation of slaveholders are in no shape responsible for its existence. They had no agency in its introduction, and therefore, although its existence were admitted to be their misfortune, it can never be proved to be their fault. Its abolition, under existing circumstances, is believed to be morally impossible.
In the 1920s, the Daughters of the American Revolution decided to start marking the National Old Trails Road with Madonna of the Trail statues. Each state from Maryland to the West Coast was to get one, and Missouri's was placed here in Lexington. On September 17, 1928, then County Circuit Judge Harry Truman in Jackson County, Missouri, came here and gave the dedication speech to commemorate that. He was the president of the National Old Trails Road Association.
This house stands at 1301 South Street in Lexington, Missouri. It was built in 1840 by William B. Waddell, one of the founders of the Pony Express. He lived here until 1868. He traded the establishment for a Baptist pastorium, and in 1869 it became the location of the Baptist Female College. One of those attendees was the mother of President Harry Truman.
So Antoinette, we've spent the day exploring my town. Here we are at the Heist. You know, this bank was a bank in 1866 when Jesse and Frank James robbed it of $2,000. They thought there was going to be $100,000, but the town was a little war-weary. But it's pretty cool, I think, to wrap up the day with a beer here at a bar called the Heist. So what was your favorite takeaway from the day?
My favorite part of the day absolutely was down at the Missouri River, talking about York and his involvement with the Lewis and Clark expedition. More specifically, how the Flathead tribe responded to his blackness of his skin and the story that I told about that earlier. It's so touching to hear that someone that had never seen a person of color held them in such high regard without any sort of judgments whatsoever. It was amazing.
It was an amazing story, and I didn't know that until you dredged it out, and I thought I knew a lot about Lewis and Clark, so that was neat to learn something new from you. And for me, I think just reflecting on the fact that I spent a decade here growing up and vaguely being aware of the history and maybe more so, but really encapsulating it in one trip from Lewis and Clark through the Santa Fe Trail Trade, the California Gold Rush, the Civil War, right up through the outlaw era. This town really encapsulates all that is Western America, and probably the eastern end of Western America, but this in many respects is the gateway to the West because of that, and I think that's my takeaway.
I learned so much today. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for coming along. Let's cheers.